Well, I never thought I'd enjoy watching paint dry, but here we are. Today we're going to take a look at the Holbein artist's watercolor granulating bird set. Someone requested I check these out because I've been told this is some of the best watercolor paint out there. Hi folks, I'm Chris, and if you're new here, welcome to my watercolor aviary. There are a handful of these themed sets that came out last year, and I picked the bird set because, obviously. This QR code on the box is for an Amazon authenticity app called Transparency. Companies can register their products and then put the unique code on the box so consumers know they're not receiving counterfeit products. This is a great idea. I've received counterfeit products from Amazon sellers before, so I fully support this idea. Oh my god, these are so tiny to be this expensive. The names and pigments are listed on the tubes, but this text is tiny. I have had to enlarge it with my phone to read it. The colors are Burke's Parrot Pink, Flamingo Orange, Japanese Bush Warbler Green, Peafowl Green, Eurasian Jay Rose Gray, and Shoebill Blue Gray. And these are different from standard watercolors. These, quote, granulate if you give them plenty of water. So we're going to see how much of that we can get. Let's get swatching. I should have put these in pans instead of the temporary palette. Oh well. You will want to use these on cold press paper or something with a texture to get the best granulation effect, but I'm going to swatch on both cold and hot press so that you can see the difference in how the granulation happens with each. We'll be swatching with the paint directly, and then I'll add it to a flood. No noticeable smell, that's good. Someone was telling me that these were more affordable in the EU than the US, so I wrongly assumed between that and the name that Holbein was a European company, but I was wrong. They're actually a Japanese company. It's pretty common, if confusing for art supply companies, to pick a famous artist's name for their company or branding, even if they don't have anything to do with that artist directly. Holbein, the company, not the painter, started making watercolors in the 1920s, and they billed them as, quote, European-style transparency with, quote, Japanese brush handling. Now I assume that means that these will sit on the page and mix more like European paints, but handle more like Gansai once on the page. They don't use synthetic polymer binders or oxgall to make it flow, so I think my expectation is sound. And here are the colors when dry. Let's see just how much granulation we can get here. I'm going to jump ahead here to show you what this looks like when it's dry. Well, this is gorgeous. Now, Holbein is new to granulating colors. These were introduced last year. I haven't tried their non-granulating paints, so I can't compare these to those, but here's what a different brand's non-granulating color looks like for comparison. Well, these are not meant for mixing, but we're gonna do it anyway. I'll mix it on the page first, and then in a flood, and then I'll mix them on the palette to see what we get. Now, if you've seen my other reviews, you know I usually like to do a yellow and a blue to keep it the same across sets, but since this set doesn't have a yellow, we'll go with the closest thing, the Warbler Green. And I've got the Jay Gray for the first one here, and then Shoehill Blue Gray for the rest. Oh, look how these run together. There's no hard edges, just lots of vibrant color. They lost their transparency when I mixed them on the palette, so I don't really recommend that, but these other two turned out very well. And we're going to try layering these two. Light over dark, dark over light, whatever wet, whatever dry. What I'm really looking at with this is how the granulations layer, if they lift and turn into mud or not. I'll be honest, I didn't expect this to layer well. I figured it would either lift entirely or get really cloudy, but you can see here how the pinks and the light orange are still visibly distinct from the blue-gray. Next, we'll try multimedia tests. We'll try painting over different media to test the transparency and putting other media over top to see if the watercolor's finish makes them hard to use. I've got pencils, colored pencil, watercolor pencil, waterproof ink in both a pen and free-flowing ink, Copic marker, spectrum marker, chalk, and oil pastel. is this paint this perfect with every test? It picked up a little of the Copic when I painted over it, but otherwise there's no discoloration, and it's transparent enough to let everything show through. Even the chalk! I think the chalk was the big surprise. Normally chalk will dissolve in watercolor when you paint over it and spread, and this didn't. Okay, I have said granulation several times without explaining it. Basically, it's the uneven distribution of pigments that creates a mottled effect when dry. Granulating colors are usually a blend of 2 or more pigments that are different weights or coarsenesses, or that interact differently with the water so that they precipitate out of the water at different rates. Larger, heavier pigments will settle out first and fill in the low spots on the paper. This is why textured paper is better than smooth for granulation. That also means you need plenty of water, because otherwise there's not enough water for the smaller particles to stay afloat long enough to land on the top. Many pigments produce some level of granulation naturally just based on their composition or how finely they're ground. But a few companies produce blended colors like these that are meant specifically for this layered color effect. The only other specially blended granulating multi-pigment colors that I've used are from Daniel Smith, though there are several other companies that make them. If you'd like to see a review of any of those for comparison, let me know in the comments. I've mentioned in other videos that most higher-end paints tend to stick to single pigments where possible, and that blended pigments can signal a lower quality or a lower grade of paint. But here I am praising blended pigments? What gives? The difference is the intentionality of the way the pigment is left behind on the paper. Where they're trying to cut corners on a more expensive pigment by replacing it with blended cheaper pigments, they're not aiming for the colors to come apart. They'll grind the pigments to as close to the same weight and structure as is practical so that they deposit at the same rate and it stays true to its single color appearance. And that can lead to a slightly muddier, less vibrant appearance. These, on the other hand, have the pigments ground to different weight and structure to keep them discrete from each other, so that each pigment lays down distinctly and clearly. You can use granulating paints to create interest or texture in large wash areas that might otherwise just be flat or bland. Or you can use it to suggest fine details. For example, you could use these for leaves changing color in a landscape with distant trees without having to draw every leaf a different color. So, final review. Pros. The lack of additives makes these paints a little more health and environmentally friendly. There was no fume or smell really. They have the very high grades on light fastness, and as expected without the oxgall, they did flow a little differently on the page than you might be expecting. Personally, I prefer this. I feel like I have more control over the pigment, but which one is better is really a personal preference. They weren't messy at all, and they didn't separate in the tube. They were outstanding in every test, and importantly, you can buy these tubes individually when you run out. You don't have to buy an entire set for just one color. Cons. I noticed that some of these have a little less separation, a little less granulation when you paint from a pan that has already dried instead of straight from the tube. And I suspect that that is for the same reason that the granulation works on the paper. The heavier pigments are falling to the bottom first, and then the lighter pigments are settling on top. So when you wet it down, if you just spray it or you just put a little water on the top, all you're getting is the lightweight pigments. So if you're going to put these in pans first, make sure that you use enough water to re-wet it to mix the whole thing and get all the way to the bottom of that pan. That's not so much of a con as it is something that might trip you up when you're using them if you're not paying attention to it. There really is only one rotten egg with this set, and that's the price. The MSRP for this set is almost $60. That means that this tube is $10. $10 for this tiny thing. Now, I don't know how big a part the tariffs are playing in that price because they do come from Japan, but they're not helping. Blick's got a 35% discount on these at the time of recording, but even $40 is steep. Now I think they're worth that cost, but it's going to put it out of a lot of people's range for everyday use. That's the only point that I'm going to knock off. I give this 9 sunflower seeds out of 10. So I mentioned earlier that these handle a little bit more like Gansai on the page. And if you're interested in comparing them directly to a Gansai, you should check out my review of the Kuretake Gansai Tombi Art Nouveau watercolor set that's going to pop up here on your right, my left. I'll also leave a link in the description to the Holbein, make sure I'm giving you the right name here, Holbein Artist's Watercolor Granulating Set, the bird set, down in the description. Before you go, why don't you fly on down to the comment section and tell us what your favorite bird is and why, because you can never have too many birds. If you've really enjoyed this review, there's also a link to my Patreon and my Discord down in the description. And as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. I'll be back as soon as I can with another video, and until then, happy creating!